you so very much. Thank you. Well, we're just going to go ahead and bring everyone up here now and start and get underway. How many do we need? Erica Williams, are you here? You see Erica?
We're still looking for her.
Okay. Well, hopefully she can join us. If not, we'll more than make up for it. We had a great pre-call about 2 weeks ago talking about this because it's one of these topics. It's like, all right, well, where do you start? And the fact that you're here given the description either means you don't know where to be right now or you really care about strategic marketing and social good. So I hope it's the latter, because that's what we're going to be talking about here today. We're going to be talking more broadly about some of the key strategic elements around that. As I mentioned, my name is Chris Hewer, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to have everyone introduce themselves so we get the stories right, and that we don't do it. But to my left is actually David Raper, and then next to him is actually Teresa Nemeshani, and next to her is Farah Bostic. So if you could please just spend a moment introducing yourself and what company you're with and what you've been doing.
Thanks, Chris. My name is David Raper. I'm the lead the retail stores for an organisation called Housing Works, which is a non-profit, mainly in New York, but nationally, that's about ending AIDS and homelessness, is our mission. And we provide a lot of health services and counselling services and drug services, etc. And what I do is run a chain of thrift stores, of 12 stores in Brooklyn and Manhattan called Housing Works. And as a social enterprise, and the money that we raise goes to fund the charities work combating AIDS and homelessness.
Terrific. So my name is Teresa Nemeshani. I am co-founder and CEO of a social platform called Honestly Now. It's a question and answer platform that helps you make excellent personal decisions. We also are kind of on the other side of it, a marketing platform for small businesses to help them drive a really profitable business locally.
And I'm Farah Bostic. I run a responsive design consultancy called The Difference Engine, and then have also recently put on a hackathon for the Famine in East Africa in New York as part of the 50/50 platform, which we'll probably talk about as we're going along, and also sort of building an advocacy platform for women in creative and advertising and sort of promoting the work that they do. So that's a bit about what I do.
Thank you so much. I really wish I would have used that decision engine for deciding to participate in November. If I would have only known how silly I would look at this point, I probably wouldn't have participated. Who knows what November? Please raise it again. Okay, good. So you all know why I look like this, so I'm sorry. But I wanted to start off actually with really a conversation briefly about the idea of social good. And in fact, Tracy and I had a good conversation earlier about the difference between cause and need, and actually broadly about, let's just start with the simple one, which is really what does social good mean to you and how does it relate to your particular business?
I think social good is all through our business. Obviously in the really hardcore charity parts, it's about directly improving people's lives with services that they need. But I think even for a business like ours, which is essentially a for-profit part of a charity, social good has a couple of meanings. First of all, we turn over our profits to a good cause, but also the way we go about our business has elements of social good as well. So we're essentially a reuse business. We're really green. We give people an opportunity to have things reused and not go into landfill and waste, and that's just a good part of our operating model. And fundamentally, as a business like any business, we hope to offer products that people want, which is really high quality things at a really cheap price because they've been gently used. And to a degree, every business has an element of social good because they're serving consumers, they're giving people what they need. And we all come together in this big world, and there's element of good in all through our business.
Yeah, so it came up because I'm an MBA. My DNA is business. My track record is business. I do volunteer activities outside of business, and I care about them very, very much. But I don't do triple bottom line reporting, and people have said to me when I was raising money, well, hey, why don't you position yourself as a social venture? And I made a really conscious decision to not do that because there are really important social ventures out there that need the focus that they have, and frankly, I don't want to cheapen what they do. I'm totally about making money, but doing so by meeting needs that are severely underserved. So like the customers that I'm going after are, many of them are women. They're looking for marketing platforms to drive profitable leads to them so they can do pickup, do drop off, get dinner on the table, be present for their children, etc. And I am as passionate about that as a need as I am about a cause. And it's a huge need that's there. Now, it also happens that in interacting with them, they care very much about the causes that they are aligned with. We also have a celebrity layer, and frankly, what I quickly learned in engaging with and interacting with them is that they are very aligned to the causes that they care about, and we found that we were able to deliver them value and get them engaged very quickly by just for free helping to promote the causes that they care about a lot. So by being by being very respectful and asking, finding out what causes people care about, we found that it's been just a great business generator for us.
I think for me, I'd come out of working in advertising agencies for a very long time where, we'd come up with an idea that, we'd have a celebrity, we'd have a digital platform, we'd have some sort of corporate social responsibility idea, and present those things to our clients who would sort of say, love everything, but we can't do the CSR piece because that lives in some other part of the business. And the kind of siloing of all of these needs was what made me start thinking a lot about kind of lean thinking and agile software development thinking, and how can I apply that to strategy and start solving real problems that the brand or the business have. And a lot of that became about breaking down those silos and getting the right people in the room to have conversations, whether it would be about underserved audiences or about sustainability or about social good. And that if we could actually get all those people in a room around a table and solve a real problem for their end customers, then their brand would actually benefit, their business would benefit, they'd be able to see a real return on investment. And that's been sort of the core of what I've been trying to do. And the interesting thing then is you start crossing paths with people who are actually trying to do new things, and a lot of times that happens in the social good space first. So that's been a really sort of good touch point for trying out some of these approaches and methodologies.
If I could add one minor thing, it's that I think that all of us here really care about making the world better, and that the organizations that we run, whether they be not-for-profit or for-profit, are very much aligned around our vision for doing that.
No, in fact, that's a good point. That's what I'm going to build on in a second. But first I want to find out who's here so we can maybe tailor a little bit better the rest of the conversation. So who here is actually an entrepreneur doing a startup for-profit? Good number of hands. Okay, who's actually here from a nonprofit organization? Not the same number? Raising our hands twice, or are you just getting exercise? I know. We do both. Yeah. And then who here is actually in an agency? A couple of agencies. And here, who here would consider themselves a social entrepreneur doing work for good? So a couple of the same hands, which is good, and a couple of new ones. Okay, so we've got a fairly mixed audience for a fairly mixed panel, so I think that works really well. One of the things we talked about in the call is actually the idea of product development. And of course, we all know we should understand our markets before we develop products. But we also have to look at that process of it. And is there a difference when you're developing a product for a social good organization or with the social mission behind it than there is for others? And if there is or if there isn't, a little bit more about how you approach product development. I know, David, you had some specific products like you're developing this, in particular, like some of the events that you do and some of the other things on top of it.
So, Chris, I'm going to give a bit of a different answer than we spoke about, because this product development is, is probably one of the two things that are top of mind and sort of keep me awake at night at the moment, and especially in the context of a thrift store, where we have almost zero control over, very little control over our product, because it's just whatever walks in the door. And so I'm thinking about this in two ways in that regard. First of all, how can we use both our market, how can we market to our donors, who are essentially our producers, in a way that explains, look, here's our retail concept, and so here's what we need coming through the door, but also leverage off the cause of it, like here's why we are the place that you want to come and donate first. And so build a brand about them feeling good when they come and donate to us and participate in our organisation as donors. So the social good element is huge for us in that space in terms of generating, generating us as a premium place where people want to come, and having them understand what it is that we want, because we can't take everything. But the other aspect that we're talking about in terms of marketing for social good is the way that an idea of social good can transform something that otherwise might be a little bit ordinary into something a little bit special. And so next week we have, for example, a huge fundraising event called Fashion for Action in New York, if anybody's there and wants to come, which is a big fundraiser for us. We've got a whole lot of fashion designers, a whole lot of product, and it's a party and a sale. And in one sense, you could put all of those elements into a room like this. You could put some drinks, you could put some clothes for show, and you could for sale, and you could put some people, and it would kind of like not add up to very much. But when you combine an element of marketing to that, and when you give that a sense of meaning, in two ways. One, this is for a really good cause, and you can feel good about it. And secondly, you can inject some celebrity into it. You actually create, I think you create something by that marketing. For social good, rather than just having a product that you then try and sell. You're actually using marketing for good or marketing social good to create something that's attractive to people.
Let's see. So we've built a product and are constantly evolving it that literally is supposed to incent you to be honest and to be really helpful. And we believe that everyone actually really wants to do both of those things. And we want to make it an absolute delight to do it. So I was initially inspired by the core idea when I very suddenly lost both my parents and had a child. So like my life just did this 180-degree turn really quickly. And I was like, well, how can I use modern technology to help my friends be as helpful to me as I personally needed? And suddenly I realized that like lots of people need different kinds of help. And if we can help them through this process to ask their questions in such a way that makes it easy for people to help them and get them what they need, then we would have done something special. So that's what we're really kind of obsessed about. And each day we try harder to crack the code on it, but that's our expression of being helpful through product development. So.
I mean, I think the sort of the underlying sort of hypothesis I have is there isn't much difference in terms of the way that one develops products for social good versus for commercial good, but that the sort of approach we took, for instance, with the hackathon was we'd like to raise money for the famine in East Africa. We have no idea what the best way of doing that is. We were bringing together people who are not experts in fundraising. And so the idea was let's place a lot of small bets as opposed to, we're going to fully commit to one idea, and if that crashes and burns, well, then we're out of luck. And so instead what we've been doing as part of this overarching platform of 50/50 is 50 small projects over 50 days, iterating on those, seeing what works. The ones that kind of rise to the top get backing from brands or celebrities or businesses, and the ones that don't are just sort of fun and showing the passion that people have for the cause. And so, we employed the exact same kind of thing that you would go through in a lean startup machine or a startup weekend for our hackathon, and it worked incredibly well. We had about 30 people over a weekend create 5 small fundraising projects, and most of those teams have continued on and are developing, actually one of them is developing a whole business around their idea. So that's been an interesting sort of experiment, and it shows that the same kind of concepts for developing products that you would do in terms of building utility for a business work in terms of building a social utility as well.
So it seems that, well, first of all, the interesting is the commonality, I think, over all of them as we're looking at it. But a couple of things really came out or stood out to me. Number one is about, we talk about these markets in abstracts, but all the experiences that you've really talked about, a little bit less, but I know you had mentioned underneath, is it's not so much about knowing aggregate market numbers and stuff, although that's helpful with decision making, but it's about knowing people. It seems that it's really the personal insights that you brought to bear in that process that were probably most helpful. When you're self-reflective, you will understand how you're doing it yourself. So how do you go about talking to other people to help inform the development of that product and that strategy so you actually get real human input into it instead of just data analysis to it?
That's such a good question. My eyes are sore from looking at a computer over the last couple of months and not talking enough to real people. But I think particularly as a non-profit, and maybe this is for everybody, but it is for a lot of people, when you're really strained with resources, the most efficient way that you can get to find out something and then get help executing it is by having lunch with someone, having a cup of coffee with someone and asking them for their advice. And that means you just got to be really honest about where you're at and where you want to go. Those two important things. And I think that, in my experience, is true whether you're trying to get a new product or a new proposal or a new event off the ground, something really big, or whether you're talking to literally your everyday consumer in your neighborhood, which is really important for us, your local neighborhood, and explaining to them, look, here's where we're trying to go. Is there a way that you can fit into that where we're both traveling on the same path, or we can at least enjoy the ride together?
So part of my professional background is in designing and executing qualitative market research. So I probably overcorrected for that problem, in which in the initial conception of our product, I spoke to at least 100 women talking about, well, like, would you want it private? Do you want it public? Blah, 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 blah. And, you know, they would say to me, you know, I don't trust Facebook. I would never do anything for Facebook. So our 1.0 was like completely separated from Facebook. Meanwhile, the market is moving, and you know, through lean development, we push it out, and we see that what they say and what they do are often extremely different things. So I probably overdid the talking and underdid the testing. However, in our own defense, lean development, and I think this is really important for causes and whatnot, because we're all dealing with like really super crazy lean budgets, is that doing a lean process actually presumes a certain size. And some of us are not even at that size yet. Or if you're not the one that's doing the coding and you've got the vision for it, then you're always paying out of pocket for someone else to do the coding. It's really hard to develop and execute tests on the fly and then, you know, put that back into your product. So like, we're just a little more waterfall than we really want to be. Like, we wish we were more lean. We're not quite big enough to be perfectly lean, if you know what I mean. So that's my perspective.
It's interesting. I spent about 5 years in qualitative market research as well, and I think my reaction to having done shitloads of focus groups was to go, enough already. Like, we've made this sciencey, and these are conversations, and it doesn't work. And it didn't work for the brands I worked for, and I figured it's probably not going to work for the new stuff I want to build. So instead, you know, definitely there is a desire to get out from the group of people I spend, you know, all my time with and talk to others. And you know, the Lean movement talks a lot about get out of the building, and so yes, we get out of the building, we talk to people. We try not to belabor it and spend too much time talking to too many people. It's sort of enough to get some initial feedback on the vision. Do we share the same sort of, you know, understanding of the problem? Do we both agree that it's as severe as it is? Do we think that this idea for the solution is getting us close to that, getting us close to an answer that people would be willing to change their behavior or spend money or give money in order to participate in? And a lot of what we're doing, because I'm in the same boat, and I'm slowly learning to code myself again, but you know, we're doing a lot of paper prototyping and showing people sketches of things and just getting kind of initial feedback. And then when we're ready to put something into a test that we can, you know, put up on the web, we do that as sort of cheaply and simply as possible. So it may not be fully functional yet, but it's just sort of a button here, a button there, this language or that language. And that sort of thing. But I think the trick is, you know, you still do have to go talk to people, but you have to do that with a vision in place. Otherwise, you're doing what a lot of big marketers do, which is chasing around after your consumers, and that doesn't help anybody.
Please go ahead.
Just to bounce off that a bit, being, I think, a bigger business, so we've got, you know, 20 years of history and about 150 employees in our stores. I don't know if it gets any easier to test, and I think the only thing the most important thing is that you put out the vision and you drive towards that, because otherwise, if you don't, what I sometimes experience and see and try to break out of is you either get lost in this endless analysis of trying to get smarter and smarter and smarter, or you're in this constant phase of testing, which becomes these incremental little things that soak up all of your energy, and you've just got to put your vision out there, and you'll attract, if it's a good idea, you'll attract the people that want to be around it and bring it together. And if it's not a good idea, you'll learn pretty quickly that no one's flocking to it, so you've got to change it.
So you actually hit on something earlier, Farah, relative to, I think it's really important. It's so unique, I think, about social good, perhaps. Maybe not all social good, but the idea of changing behavior. And I think that there's actually two elements of it, really, because we start looking at the market. There are the people who aren't behaving in these ways now, and then the people who are already, who we want to sustain and give greater energy to so they can sustain themselves, right? I'm going to give a quick thought. When I was actually in a prior life the chief of e-business for the US Mint, which is a really interesting role for a little while, to sell Anyways, I won't get into that whole thing. But what I realized there in trying to market coin collecting, essentially, was that all organizations exist for a similar purpose, to change people's behavior. And that behavior is fundamentally determined by what somebody knows as a function of kind of who they are, where they're at in life, you know, profile, psychographic, demographic, however you want to do it, relative to where are they at relative to your concept, idea, business. Are they aware of it? Are they not aware? Is it a foreign concept to them to be buying used clothes? Not that anyone is, but, you know, so when we start thinking about this more deeply, the idea of changing people's behavior relative to your particular business model, what are the things that you focus on when you're trying to get that behavior to change? When you're trying to reach out to new markets and get new people to come in and engage with you and engage with your projects and be a part of what it is?
I have, as part of my background, doing a lot of work with Amnesty International in Australia, and we had a financial crisis at one stage and we're working our way out of it, and in terms of this behavioural change, had this real fight between raising money and our advocacy vision, and the CEO, and getting people to be advocates for our cause. And the CEO at the time had this great saying which has stuck with me forever, which was, give me their credit cards and their hearts and minds will follow. In that, once people start doing something, they will rationalise it to themselves as the right thing to do because they legitimately want to feel that they're a good person. And so I think if you can just get that first little bit of participation from somebody, just even if it's a small action, just get them to begin to take a real action, whether it's buying something, whether it's walking into a shop, and there's different ways to get new people in. I think getting that first element of action, then the kind of like path flows out. Then people themselves will start to move down that road.
So one thing I've really increasingly focused on in the last couple of years is the power of acknowledgement and affirmation. Partially that's because I'm a parent, and when you're dealing with toilet training or whatever it is, it's like, you did it. And the same goes for organizational change, and the same goes for dealing with customers. I mean, I don't know if anyone remembers an article called What Shamu Taught Me about, that saved my marriage, and that was wild animal training, and similarly, I did a product test about, I don't know, a little while ago in San Francisco with a woman CEO who is really probably best in the market in social gaming for women. And I was like, oh, we'll put in some badges and some, like, doohickey, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, it might be enough to just have like a balloon pop up and say, you did it. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's exactly the same as being a mom, it's exactly the same as training Shamu. Many people do not get acknowledged for the just good stuff that they do every single day. And I'm just really curious, if we tuck that into all of the things that we do, how much more people are going to do the right things.
Yeah, I think, I say that in behavior change, but in many respects what I mean by that is finding people who are already engaged in something very close to the behavior you want them to do and leaning in on that. And so, again, having spent a lot of years working with brands who want to get people who are never going to buy their thing to buy their thing, that's a behavior change that, exactly, why waste your time? And now you're chasing customers around and you're not really getting much in return for that effort. And so a big part of what I try to figure out is, well, what are people already doing, and how do we make that incrementally easier, or how do we make that incrementally more useful, or incrementally more rewarding, or incrementally more engaging? Because if you can find somebody that agrees with your sort of vision for something, is actively seeking a solution, has maybe even cobbled together a painful or an expensive one, then you can probably say, okay, you're willing to spend all of this time and effort to do this thing. Here's an easier way to do exactly what you want to do. And if it's also fun, it's also engaging, it's also rewarding in some other way, then even better. But a lot of times just like closing the gap of effort for somebody is enough to get them engaged with whatever your whatever your campaign or cause or product are. And so that's where I tend to start, is finding the people who are already kind of doing what I want to do, but how do I close that effort gap for them to make that simpler? I think the other thing, having tried to work on how do we get people you know, I spent the month of July in London, and there you could not avoid the conversation about the famine in East Africa. When I came home to New York, nobody was talking about it. I mean, it was a busy summer, so it's not exactly like this was the top of mind news story. But getting people engaged with that turned out to be the loser story. Telling people that children were starving in Africa and that one was dying every 6 minutes was not particularly compelling. Talking to people about the opportunity to bring creative people together with tech people to create something for social good, that was the compelling story. Like, that you get to pat yourself on the back for having spent a weekend doing nice things, and you get free beer. Like, that was something that got people engaged. Children starving in Africa, not so much. So sometimes it's also just finding the right story to tell to get them to engage in the behavior you want them to, as opposed to, again, chasing them around.
So that's a great, actually, segue into talking a little bit more about positioning, which I think we've done, and just in summary, everyone's really hit on the same idea. There's a feeling that we want to convey, that people have. And that's very much in alignment with general brand strategy, if you look at traditional advertising and marketing. But, you know, there's one difference. The idea is that it's feeling good and also having everyone be good as a result, instead of the exploitative use of that, which is making people feel good or aspire to feel good to take money out of their wallet and to have that sort of exchange with it. So when we're starting to get into the positioning of social good, as you were just talking about, trying to find those stories, trying to find those points of connection really to it, what are the other ways, or what are the other questions maybe that we have to ask about your particular service when you're looking at the idea of positioning it around feeling good, making it fun, and then connecting with those people and making new connections as a result of how you've kind of positioned that strategically? It's a complicated one, but yeah.
It's actually not my story, so I'm going to, for a moment, be promoting someone else's business. But there's one of the companies that was involved in the 50/50 project at the outset is a UK-based company called Made by Many. And they were approached by, and you can find decks about this on SlideShare, they're fantastic, but they were approached by Skype because Skype had realized that teachers were using Skype to connect with one another, and they wanted to do a campaign to promote Skype to teachers. And Made by Many doesn't really do campaigns. So their response was, how about we make it easier for teachers to use Skype? And then teachers will do more teachers will use Skype more. And so what they went through was a whole sort of lean UX design process, talking to teachers all over the world about how they were using Skype and what they ultimately wanted. And they had, you know, amazing visions of what they thought teachers were going to need. Like, they were going to need lesson plans and videos and downloadable stuff, and it was going to be awesome. And then they put all of this stuff in front of teachers who went, yeah, no, I just want to be able to find other teachers. And so what they ultimately built, their sort of minimum viable product, was a directory of teachers on Skype, and it's now a product called Skype in the Classroom. And it's brought on like 50,000 more teachers into using Skype. And so that kind of thing gets you a long way in just sort of like coalescing people around what they're already doing and making that easier. But again, it's sort of this, you know, you've got to actually be humble enough to realize maybe, you know, your big broad vision is a little too big and broad, and bring it down to something very, very simple. And they're now using it to transfer files with each other and, you know, teach in each other's classrooms and that kind of thing. But that's sort of how they've approached that, and I think that's an excellent case study for these kinds of efforts.
Excuse me, what was the name of the organization that actually was approached by Skype?
They're called Made by Many.
Made by Many.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
So to me, I think I see it as being around alignment and what are some natural connections. I mean, I think it's very in parallel with what you've been describing. So like, everyone's got an agenda. I will never fault anyone for having an agenda. I just want to know what it is so I can help. And I think we just all know what everyone else's agenda is. Then let's like match them all together so we can be helpful to each other. So there are a few things that we know. One is that when someone pitches out a question, if you happen to know the answer, it's like really hard to not respond, right? Like it's this like knee-jerk response, right? Now, in the same token, there are, you know, millions and millions and millions of independent business people who are experts in stuff, and they deliver services around stuff. They know a lot of things about a lot of things, and they probably have answers to a whole lot of questions. Now, I'm not talking about just like the stuff that's on Quora, but about stuff that affects people's lives, like just regular decisions that people are making, which could be, you know, what am I wearing, but it could be, I'm getting a divorce and I'm not sure if I should tell my 13-year-old that it's because my husband cheated on me. Like, how do I do that? You know, there are family therapists that help with this sort of stuff and, you know, whatnot. At any rate, all of these small business people are supposed to be building their personal digital brands right now. And so if you talk to any of them, they're like, well, I have a Twitter account, but I don't really know what to do with it. I'm on Facebook, and I'm supposed to be using it for my business, but I'm not really sure what to do with it. Yeah, I'm supposed to do a blog. I don't know what to write in my blog. So we're kind of like, no problem. We know people have the questions. Let's pitch up the questions, because once the question happens, like, tell us what you know, and then let's like quickly digitize it and let you spit it out so you can show the world in a very natural, relevant way how kick-ass you are, right? And then let's like propagate that and propagate it and propagate it. So just to kind of like bring this comment in for a landing, the way I see it is aligning with stuff that people are, you know, naturally wanting to do anyway and have it help them. It's pretty simple. I think it's complicated to align them up, but I think if you don't have that, then you're always doing workarounds, and it's never going to work.
And I would agree with that, and I think for organizations that have an aspect of social good, whatever that is, to them, that's a huge opportunity to add another facet to your brand and another way people can engage, and so an opportunity to reach a whole new bunch of people. And so if you're a business that has a social good aspect, it's another pathway to people. So for example, you know, our core business is running thrift shops that sell stuff to moderately income people for like $10 to $20, and we use that money to help very poor people with AIDS. And you know, that's good, and that's a certain segment of the market, I guess. But because we can also associate our brand with fashion, and because there's a whole lot of people in fashion in New York City that have a connection with HIV and AIDS, and those people actually are at an income tier and an influence tier well beyond what my customers or our organization's clients are at the moment, that's a whole new doorway then to open up into a new market. And so we were able to capitalize on that by saying, okay, well, let's start having some you know, fashion-focused events that are more for higher income people, and we can use our brand of Housing Works, which is spreads across all of those people, and then pitch us, if you like, a new product to this group of people up here that allows us to expand. And you know, we've done that really well. And then our next step is to say, okay, you know, let's take that into the physical product space, and what sort of Housing Works products can we be bringing out that's going to hit, you know, wealthier, fashion-conscious people who care about the Housing Works brand and like it because of the good work that we do, but will buy a product that our existing customers can't. And using the social good aspect of us and using that brand that engages with consumers or people on a different dimension is a huge advantage to make that kind of like sort of incremental growth, those incremental growths that people have been talking about.
So we've been talking really so far about the sort of marketing that happens in pre-marketing, really, I guess. It's actually the idea of understanding markets, actually connecting with markets and the product development based on these insights. But then there's the next level of this thing where we go from thinking about how are we going to connect, what are those positioning points, to the idea of actually increasing awareness. And we've seen obviously over the last 5 years a huge shift from traditional advertising to digital, over the last 10 on that. And then over the last several years, the idea of even conversational marketing and what that means through social media. So to what extent are you looking at the mix of different traditional and emerging marketing channels, avenues, and vehicles for reaching these new markets? Are you spending on print ads, billboards? Are you spending on online? Are you just running a Twitter account? How are you actually approaching your marketing strategy and the mix for reaching these new markets and making people aware of what you're doing?
So, you know, at Housing Works, we have no advertising budget. All of our marketing at the moment is designed to either hit a local community, like literally with signage and postcards and in-store stuff for an area like a mile around the store, because that's where people shop. Or for some of the other things, it's about using our networks to access community. So getting the bloggers talking about us, actually that's it pretty much, getting the bloggers talking about us, and getting celebrities tweeting about us. And we're really, I don't know, I feel like we're behind the 8 ball there, we're not advanced, but everything we are doing in the digital space is about reaching to a connection we have and then getting them to reach out to their people. And so it's almost like, it's like digital word of mouth.
So, I also have no marketing budget. I have some, but we really want to be super clear on what we're going to spend it on, and so we're really talking about some light social media digital spending, really around running tests, and if something starts to go, we'll throw a little bit more money behind it, but that's really not the thrust of it. So we're very much around influencer programs. In a number of different dimensions. I mean, I will tell you that I've done like really complex, big company marketing strategy work for many years, and this is absolutely, definitely the most complicated marketing problem I've ever had to deal with. Being a platform and deciding how to pick our shots is really challenging. By and large, the way that we're doing it is trying to engage pockets of influencers that we think may have really interesting questions and trying to coach them through pushing out questions, just really interesting stuff. So we're doing a pilot right now at Barnard College with a bunch of evangelist students who we're saying, throw those questions out there. We think that you're intelligent young women. Show us what you're thinking. We're doing stuff in the mom, we will be doing some stuff in the mom vertical. And also, I write a lot about women in tech, and have somehow built up a little bit of a brand around that, and have been blessed to have built up connections with a lot of women in tech. One campaign that we are now kicking off across a bunch of different people, we're calling it XX for Xmas, Xmas. So encouraging women to buy products from women-led companies for the holidays, or just let's know about them, and let's see how much women-led we can buy, just sort of for the fun of it. So we started putting out messages, and people are getting really excited about it and submitting gift ideas that are actually produced by women-led companies. So stay tuned on that one, but I'm excited about it. Now, how does it actually affect Honestly Now? A little bit tougher, and I gotta tell you, I'm trying to skin the cat on that, because at the end of the day, I'm CEO of a funded company that has got to put numbers on the board in terms of usage of my platform. So for the time being, we want people to push questions out that are related to these gifts, and whatnot, but it's a balancing act with being really organic and legitimate to the cause. And actually, I just said the word cause, but is it a cause, or is it a need that there are these women-led businesses that are trying to be profitable? So I'm not really entirely sure if it's a cause or if it's a need, but it's important, and we'd like people to use our platform to do it. So that's just an example of an influencer program that we seek to kick off. Hope it works.
So I spend other people's marketing budgets. That's sort of the core of my business. One of the things though that I have consciously made a move towards, having sat in enough of those meetings where as an account planner myself, my colleagues are saying, well, we learned all of this stuff about what the consumer really wants in this space, but we didn't want to focus on mere utility. So we went for something emotionally engaging, and it's well, it's an airline, and checking in to fly is really kind of a horrible experience. Maybe mere utility would utterly transform the way they feel about this brand. I tend to err on the side of mere utility, and find that it works pretty well. But that then translates into a lot of what we try to develop, which is, as we're designing whatever this program is off of the strategy we've developed, which is usually around mere utility, it's also developing a set of metrics for what actually is a successful campaign. How do we know what we've won, or a successful effort? And so a lot of it, comes down to, on the rare occasion that we are, negotiating any kind of digital media buy, it's getting the publishers to stop talking to us about reach, because I don't really care about your reach. I care about click-through rates, and I care about conversion. And often, here's a tip: if you're negotiating over this kind of thing, and you say, I don't really give a shit what your CPM is, tell me what your conversion rate is, all of a sudden you can get a significantly discounted rate on that media buy. So, because you're holding their feet to the fire in a very different way. And so a lot of what I think is interesting is both driving towards action, and action that matters for whatever behavior you want to affect, whether that's selling more of a product or getting more participants in a cause. At the same time, I think one of the things that has been slowly changing, and everybody talks about it, very few brands and organizations do an effective job of it, though I think the people who have no ad budget do the best job, frankly, is that advertising was always a very interruptive model. And, but I think we kind of overestimated how interruptive it was. When you're watching a television program, the show is not, like, they don't overlay advertising on top of the show. It's not like you can't hear what the characters are saying because you have to listen to a Tide ad. We stop the program for 2 minutes and play some advertising to pay for the content, right? When you come back, you haven't missed anything. But interrupted advertising online actually pops up over what you're trying to read, interrupts the video that you're trying to watch, is actually really interruptive, and it just pisses people off. So if you're actually trying to get any kind of affinity, maybe don't do that. And a lot of what I've spent time trying to figure out is, where are people spending their time online, and be there in a relevant way, be a participant in that community, be a good citizen in that group, provide something of value to that Tumblr, whatever it is that we're doing should be not just transactional and definitely not interruptive, but more participative from the brand perspective as well, or from the cause perspective. So I think, kind of a mix of driving for that utility, actually, aiming at serious results, but being nice and, playing well with others is also a really important piece.
So we've got a couple of minutes left here. I have a bunch of other questions, but I want to open it up to give you a chance to get some insights out of this wonderful panel up here tonight, or this afternoon. Feels like night for me, I haven't been sleeping. But who out here might have a question where we could, anyone? Bueller? Come on. You've got some experts up here who can give you some good advice. So please think of a good question.
It's a lot of pressure. My name is Chris Wagner. I work with an organization called Compost Cab in DC. I guess just a basic question for you guys. Do you have any advice on sort of mobilizing existing customers to draw in new customers to some of your businesses? Finding the people that are already passionate about what you're doing and kind of leveraging them to spread the word.
Yeah, so this is a total product shill. Get them to ask their friends questions about how they're doing things, like, hey, what would you do with this plastic bottle? Would you throw it in the trash, or would you consider, whatever? Send them a question on a platform called Honestly Now. This is just an idea. And, send it to them, and then they get pulled in and they start thinking about it. Like, oh God, I threw something out like this like 5 minutes ago. Maybe I should go get it. So one of the things that we're excited about with our platform is that it's a 360-degree loop of engagement, and a great way that people who want their friends to sort of convert into something different, the question and answer interaction is like the millennial, since the beginning of man, that's how we do that. That's sort of like how we drive change. So that's my personal shill, but I think there are probably lots of other ideas for word of mouth. So.
Yeah, I think this is part of where I got very inspired. If you're looking for a very dense but very informative read about how to create a new product and run a startup, there's a book called 4 Steps to the Epiphany, which is an excellent one. And one of the things that they talk about, and Steve Blank writes about in that book, is the idea of talking to these early evangelists for your product, finding those people who agree that there's a problem, have tried to cobble together a solution that's sort of painful to them. If you can actually solve their pain point and provide them with something of value, they will and cultivate their sort of expertise and advice as those lead users in what you develop, then they're going to be vested in what you've created. And it's part of why I've really come into this sort of transparency and collaborativeness, or if that's a word, collaboration around building product, and in a way that encourages the people who've had a hand in making what you're trying to get people engaged with. Because then if they have a hand in it, then they want other people to know about that. And I think giving people more than just a voice, but also a role, is an important way of getting people to act as evangelists. And quite frankly, just asking them to pass it along goes a long way. I think there's often this sort of, does that become sort of a chain letter or something like that, worry, when actually it doesn't have to be that big of a deal. It's why people add those like buttons at the bottom of, the bottom of the page. It's an easy way for people to pass things along, and I think again, the easier you can make the sharing of that, the better. But if you can also give people kind of a role, positive feedback for having, been involved, some kind of, and I don't mean rewards in the sense of points and badges, but some kind of real, tangible reward for having been, someone who likes you, then that goes a long way as well.
If I could just piggyback on that, because one thing to think about is status, and I don't mean it in a cheesy kind of way, but if you've got some people that are already like doing the right thing, acknowledging that they're doing the right thing, and like, hey, you know something that other people don't know, and let me remind you what you know and what you're already doing that is so awesome. And so, given your awesomeness, if you think other people should know it too, we invite you, we give you these very easy tools to spread the word yet further, but really at the end of the day, just thank you for being so awesome. So consider status, because I know that from the gamification folks, they always say that like status is probably the #1, converter instead of free stuff or, whatnot. While the word status is cheesy, that's not what it's about. It's really about acknowledging like the goodness that someone is. Sounds like you got a lot of those.
Yeah, I would agree. It's about you giving them a role and giving them that role as leaders, and how you reward that and incentivize that. It might be status, it might be points. We'll create, it depends on the size of your organization, create real committees and say, okay, you're the committee that's in charge of growing, plastic bottle recycling or whatever. Giving them recognition, making them experts on your website, making them ambassadors, all those sorts of things that recognize their role as driving that cause.
I want to add one point to this, and I'll get your question because you're up first, and then second, and unfortunately we're out of time, I believe. It's really interesting. The one thing here that is really connecting all of these and connecting all of our businesses really is that it's not about the transactions. In fact, we've only talked about transactions, I think, once when we were suggesting the use of your software, actually, which is good because it's about the relationships we have. Relationships we have with others who can activate others. The relationships we have because of shared values. And actually, that's the commonality that we're looking across all these organizations, is that we find that connection point that is really the sense of belonging to something greater than ourselves. And that's what's actually, the term marketing, we all think of it sometimes as a four-letter word in this space in particular. And this is about transcending that, because it's not about the taking of money. It's about what we're in together and how we're doing it together, and we have a higher purpose. And I think that's the difference. There's a sense where the cause is you helping those people who have a need. And it's that connection that's a really interesting one.
I'm Mike Nelson. I'm with the CSC Leading Edge Forum, and I just finished a report on transparency called Seal or Reveal, Creating Your Transparency Strategy. In the report, I did a lot of work with nonprofits who have been quite innovative in being more transparent. But a number of them have come up against challenges. They've got privacy concerns, they've got vendors and partners who aren't excited about them sharing information they might want to keep private. I was curious if any of your organizations have made a special effort to be more transparent, to build trust among your community, and whether you've had any successes or failures you might share about that.
That's a really interesting question, and as a very early stage startup, I don't quite have the legacy to tap into, be like, oh, well, perfect case study. But I think on some level, we really have kind of designed a machine that's meant to be a transparency machine. We're kind of saying, hey, you've got questions that as yet are unasked, and they are unasked, and they're like, can you hear me? A load on your back, because you're afraid to ask them. Either, like you probably don't feel safe asking for some reason. So we've kind of made it easier to do that. Now, not every question being asked is safe for everybody to get to, so there's like a light amount of moderation that, that we do, and we want the community to participate in that. So we're about maintaining that safe space so that optimal transparency can happen. We do have questions sometimes that are related to medical or things like that. We've got policies in place, processes to deal with them, but by and large, but yeah, I mean, I think the whole point is actually transparency as far as we're concerned.
What about your operations and how a lot of companies have been quite open about who works for them, what they do, a lot of different levels of transparency?
Yeah, so I have a blog. I'm pretty out there with what we're doing. I've been pretty open about failures that we've had. It is, once you get outside funding, that's also kind of, a little bit of a trickier path to deal with, because there are just some things, I mean, we're like adults here, so like not everything, can go. I don't stick my P&L out on my blog. But more transparency is better, for sure, and we have to walk that line.
I mean, that's been a big piece of, as a consultancy, when I work with clients. I think, again, having worked in an agency setting where you get that brief from the client, you write a brief internally, you go off and make something, hopefully. Maybe it's 4 weeks of strategy and 4 weeks of creative or something else, but the client's not there for any of that. And so when you turn up 6 weeks later and show them something, there's often this, whoa, that's not what I was expecting kind of moment. And I think that's a big place where I've seen the relationships I've had with clients break down. At the same time, there are things that they really want to do because they're well-intentioned and would like to, be able to be transparent themselves. And I've had clients of mine who've been in the pharmaceutical space, for instance, where we've worked really collaboratively with them to come up with a platform for, this was an arthritis medication. And one of the big things that we came up against was just this issue of arthritis, relatively mild arthritis, is not something you can see. And so when someone suffers from arthritis, they worry a lot about other people thinking they're faking it. And they also don't really know what causes arthritis. Like, there's a whole lot of uncertainty around it, and we felt like, and they felt like, there was this opportunity to kind of be advocates and educators about arthritis. But because of regulatory issues, they just couldn't build that kind of community, because every time someone said they had an interaction with a drug, then that interaction has to be reported. So all the best intentions and all the best, very open, transparent, collaborative process that we had in working with them, that then got shut down because there just isn't sort of a regulatory scheme that's in place that allows them to do those things. So it's very, it very much depends on the industry of the client. But in
Ladies
general,
and gentlemen, forgive me for interrupting your panels, but we have to announce, sadly and happily, the final panel at Artisphere today. 4 o'clock sessions. We got Mobile Gaming Domination in the Dome Theater. Tapping the App, sponsored by Scrib. That is in the ballroom. And then Leading a Growing Company in Spectrum Theater. Social Good Marketing Track. Tools to activate social good. And that's in the Terrace Gallery. And lastly, Music in a Digital Age in the Black Box Theater. Thanks so much.
Just make sure everyone else heard that too, because I just want to make sure that's not in my head, right?
Right.
I've had Peter's voice like that in my head before, so I just want to double check.
yeah. So we try to be as transparent as we can be with our partners and customers, and then sometimes we find ourselves having been really open and collaborative and transparent right up to the point where the FDA says. So it all sort of depends.
By the way, there are sort of gender versus openness, privacy issues. I'm not going to go into them, but I think there's huge fodder for study around gender differences, around perception of safety versus transparent and openness.
Just one sentence. I think we've talked a lot about participation, and if you really want people to participate and collaborate, you have to be transparent with them, whether they're customers or donors or whatever, because otherwise they'll just want to do the right thing and they'll go off on totally wrong path.
Unfortunately, as you heard from the announcement, we're unfortunately out of time right now, so I just want to close with one closing thought, and we'll be around for a couple minutes, so you'll be able to ask some questions directly afterwards. And that's this. A few years ago, when I was talking to Craig Newmark, he made the point that it used to be that all organizations were community service organizations. The chairs you're sitting in, you're probably not thinking of as a community service, but where would you all be without the company? that made these chairs. What happened is that somewhere along the way, in the beginning of multinationalism or globalism or whatever, and how you look at it, the focus became more on the profits than on the value that it was providing to community. And what we're seeing right now among all the 3 different companies represented here and many of you out there is that being profitable and doing good for the community is not mutually exclusive anymore. In fact, it's becoming more of a requirement every day. As more and more people understand the sustainability issues with being green and what's happening in the world, the global consciousness is shifting in this direction. And that it will soon be mandatory for whether it ends up being, triple bottom line accounting or whatever it is, that companies have a level of transparency relative to their impacts and what's happening out there. And we're seeing this transformation unfold right in front of us. But we also are seeing this unfold in a way that we get to direct it. We get to make decisions every day in our jobs and our lives that actually makes this happen together. And it's that global connectedness that we have as a result of the internet and the technologies that we're working with here today that make it all possible. We're not living in isolation anymore. We are all indeed connected. And social good is really about looking out for one another. And that's something that all 3 of these companies do here. And thank you all for joining us and participating. And thank you for coming today.